A Werewolf Shifter Romance by Lena, from Lena's Romance Library. Chapter 1. The Scent of Secrets. The storm that swept through Millbrook that October night brought more than just thunder and rain. It brought him. Lyra Thorne pressed her face against the frost-bitten window of the servants' quarters, watching the tempest rage across the manor grounds. Lightning split the sky in violent streaks, illuminating the ancient oak trees that bent and twisted like tortured souls. She should have been sleeping, preparing for another grueling day of scrubbing floors and dodging the cruel remarks of Lady Pemberton's daughters. But something kept her awake. A restless energy thrummed beneath her skin, as if the storm itself was calling to her. Still watching that damned weather? Lyra turned to find her younger brother Finn propped up on his elbow in the narrow cot across from hers. Even in the dim candlelight, she could see the pallor of his skin, the way his chest rose and fell with labored breaths. The fever had been burning through him for 3 days now, and despite her desperate attempts to tend to him, he was getting worse. "Rest, Finn. You need your strength." She moved to his bedside, pressing a cool cloth to his burning forehead. At 17, he was 3 years younger than her, but the sickness had aged him, carving hollow shadows beneath his eyes. "The physician won't come," Finn whispered, his voice barely audible above the howling wind. "Not for servants, not unless—" "Don't." Lyra's voice came out sharper than she intended. "Don't even think about asking Lady Pemberton for help. She'd rather watch us both die than spend a copper on our care." It was true, and they both knew it. For 5 years since their parents died in the mill fire, they'd been nothing more than property to the Pemberton family. Lyra worked as a house servant, invisible except when someone needed to vent their frustrations or assign blame for broken china. Finn helped in the stables when his health allowed, which had been less and less lately. Another crack of thunder shook the manor, and Lyra felt that strange pull again. Stronger this time. It was as if something in the storm was singing to her blood, awakening parts of herself she'd never known existed. "Lyra." Finn's hand found hers, his fingers ice cold despite the fever. "Promise me something. Anything. If something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you. Promise me you'll find a way out of here. You're meant for more than this life. I've always known it. There's something different about you. Something special." Before Lyra could respond, a sound cut through the storm. A howl that made the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. It wasn't quite animal, wasn't quite human, but something caught between the two. The sound was filled with pain, rage, and a loneliness so profound it seemed to echo in her very bones. "What was that?" Finn struggled to sit up. "I don't know." But even as she said it, Lyra found herself moving toward the window again. The howl came once more, closer this time, and with it came the most peculiar sensation, as if someone was calling her name. "I have to go check the grounds," she heard herself saying, reaching for her cloak. "Are you mad? In this storm? Something's wrong. Something's out there." She couldn't explain the compulsion that drove her toward the door. It was foolish, reckless, but she felt as powerless to resist it as the trees were to resist the wind. Wrapping her threadbare cloak around her shoulders, Lyra slipped from the servants' quarters into the main corridor. The manor was silent except for the storm's fury, the family safely tucked away in their warm beds, while servants like her faced whatever dangers the night might bring. She made her way through the kitchen and out the back door, immediately regretting her decision as the rain lashed against her face like icy needles. The wind was so strong she could barely keep her footing, but still something pulled her forward, toward the edge of the estate where the civilized gardens gave way to wild forest. Lightning flashed again, and in that brief moment of illumination, she saw him, A man, or what had once been a man, collapsed against the base of the great oak tree. His clothes were torn to shreds, his body covered in what looked like fresh wounds. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Even in the darkness, they seemed to glow with an otherworldly light, amber gold like heated honey. "Help me," he whispered, and his voice carried the same wild quality as the howl she'd heard. "Please." Every instinct screamed at her to run. This man was dangerous. She could sense it in the way the very air around him seemed to vibrate with barely contained power. But beneath the danger, she sensed something else. Pain, desperation, and a bone-deep exhaustion that called to every protective instinct she possessed. "You're hurt," she said, approaching slowly. "What happened to you?" "Hunters." The word came out as a growl. "They've been tracking me for days. I managed to lose them, but—" He gestured weakly at his wounds. Lightning illuminated his face more clearly, and Lyra's breath caught. He was devastatingly handsome in a wild, untamed way. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw darkened with stubble, and hair black as midnight that fell in damp waves around his face. But it was more than his physical beauty that struck her. There was something about him that felt familiar, as if she'd been waiting her entire life to find him. "I can help you," she found herself saying, though she had no idea how. "But we need to get you inside before you bleed to death." He tried to stand and immediately swayed, one hand bracing against the tree trunk. "I can't. If they find me near innocent people—" "The servants' quarters are separate from the main house. No one will look for you there." She moved to his side, surprised by how natural it felt to slide her arm around his waist for support. The moment their bodies touched, a shock of electricity raced through her, so intense she nearly gasped aloud. He felt it too. She could see it in the way his eyes widened, the way his entire body went rigid. "What are you?" he whispered, staring at her as if she were the dangerous one. "I'm nobody," Lyra replied automatically. "Just a servant." But even as she said the words, she knew they weren't true. Something was happening to her. Something that had started the moment she'd heard his howl. Her skin felt too tight. Her senses too sharp. She could smell things she'd never noticed before. The copper scent of his blood. The wild musk that clung to him. And underneath it all, something that made her mouth water and her heart race. "No," he said, still staring at her with those impossible eyes. "You're not nobody. You're—" He inhaled deeply, and his expression changed to one of shock. "It can't be." "What can't be?" "Your scent. It's—" He shook his head as if trying to clear it. "This isn't possible. The bloodline died out centuries ago. I don't know what you're talking about." But her hands were shaking as she helped him stumble toward the manor. Whatever he sensed in her, whatever impossible thing he thought she was, she could feel it stirring to life in her veins like a sleeping dragon finally awakening. They made it to the servants' quarters just as another howl split the night, distant but getting closer. The stranger's entire body tensed, and she felt his muscles bunch under her hands as if preparing to fight or flee. "They're coming," he whispered. "The hunters. I've put you in danger just by being here." "Then we'll face it together," Lyra heard herself say, surprised by the steel in her own voice. "Whatever you are, whatever's hunting you, I'm not going to let them have you." He stared at her for a long moment, those golden eyes searching her face as if trying to solve an ancient riddle. "You have no idea what you're offering, do you? What I am? What you might be?" "No," she admitted. "But I know you need help. And I know that for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The storm raged on outside, but inside the small servant's room, with this mysterious stranger bleeding on her brother's empty cot while Finn slept fitfully in the corner, Lyra felt the first stirrings of a destiny she'd never imagined. She didn't know his name, didn't know what he was running from, or why his very presence made her blood sing with recognition. But she knew, with a certainty that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure, that her life as an invisible servant girl was over forever. The real question was, what would rise from its ashes? Chapter 2. Blood and Revelations. The stranger's wounds were worse than Lyra had initially thought. By flickering candlelight, she could see the deep gashes that ran across his chest and arms, too precise to be from animal claws, too savage to be from any normal weapon. They looked almost ritualistic, as if someone had been trying to carve symbols into his flesh. "These aren't from hunters," she whispered, carefully cleaning the blood from a particularly nasty wound near his shoulder. "What did this to you?" He hissed as the cloth touched torn skin, his jaw clenching. "Silver blades, blessed by their priests and carved with runes meant to prevent healing." His voice held a bitter edge. "The Order of the Iron Cross doesn't hunt ordinary prey." "The Order of what?" Lyra paused in her ministrations, meeting his eyes. In the candlelight, they seemed to shift between gold and amber, as if lit from within by some inner fire. Fanatics. They believe anything supernatural should be wiped from the earth. He studied her face intently. "You really don't know what you are, do you?" "I'm human." But even as she said it, her hands continued their work with an expertise she shouldn't possess. Somehow she knew exactly how much pressure to apply, which wounds needed tending first. Her fingers moved with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before, though she'd never treated anything worse than kitchen burns. Human. He repeated the word like it was a foreign concept. "Tell me, Lyra, how did you know my name?" She froze, the bloodied cloth halfway to another wound. I didn't say your name." "You called me Kale when you helped me to the tree, right before the lightning struck." Ice ran through her veins. She had no memory of speaking his name, yet somehow it felt right on her tongue. Kale. Like a word she'd known all her life but had forgotten until this moment. "That's impossible," she breathed. "Many impossible things have happened tonight." Kyle's voice was gentler now, but his eyes never left her face. "The way you found me in the storm. The way you knew exactly where I was hurt before you even looked. The way my wounds are already beginning to heal under your touch." Lyra glanced down at the gash she'd been cleaning and gasped. The edges were indeed knitting together, the angry red inflammation fading to pink. "I don't understand. You're a healer, a true healer. The gift runs in only one bloodline, and that line was supposed to have died out 3 centuries ago during the Great Purge." Kale struggled to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounds. "What's your family name?" "Your real family name?" "Thorn. It's always been Thorn." His eyes widened. "Thorn? Not a servant name, a noble name. One of the oldest supernatural families in the realm." He reached out slowly, his fingers barely brushing her cheek. The moment his skin touched hers, warmth flooded through her body, and she could swear she felt something click into place, like a key turning in a lock she'd never known existed. "My parents died in a mill fire," she whispered. "They were nobody special, poor workers trying to make an honest living. Or that's what they told everyone." Kyle's thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone, and she found herself leaning into the touch despite every rational thought screaming at her to pull away. The surviving members of the old families went into hiding after the purge. They took common names, common jobs, anything to blend in with human society. But the bloodline gifts don't disappear. They just lie dormant until awakened. Awakened by what? His eyes darkened. By finding your true mate. The words hung between them like a challenge, and Lyra felt her heart stutter in her chest. That's not possible. I don't even know you. Your soul knows me. Kale's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Just as mine recognized you the moment I caught your scent. You're my fated mate, Lyra. My other half. And if I'm right about your bloodline, you're also the key to breaking the curse that's been slowly killing me for the past century. Century? She pulled back, staring at him in shock. How old are you? Old enough to remember when your family ruled the Northern Territories. Old enough to have searched for you my entire adult life without knowing your face or name. Only that somewhere in the world, there was a woman who could save me from becoming a monster. From the corner of the room came a weak cough, and Lyra remembered her brother. She turned to see Finn watching them with fever-bright eyes, his face flushed with heat. Lyra, he whispered, who is that man? And why do I feel strange? Kale's attention shifted to Finn, and his nostrils flared slightly as he scented the air. His expression darkened. He's dying. Poison in his blood. Something designed to target supernatural bloodlines specifically. What? Lyra was at her brother's side in an instant, pressing her hand to his forehead. His skin was burning, and beneath her palm, she could feel something wrong. Something toxic flowing through his veins. But he's human. We're both human. The Pemberton family have been hunters for generations, Kale said grimly. They collect supernatural artifacts, study bloodlines, eliminate threats. They probably suspected what you were long before tonight and decided to test their theory by slowly poisoning your brother. If he dies and you manifest healing powers trying to save him. They'd know for certain. Horror washed through her as the pieces fell into place. The way Lady Pemberton always watched her with calculating eyes. The questions about her parents, her heritage, the jobs that kept her close to the family, always under observation. We have to get him out of here. She started to lift Finn, but Kale caught her wrist. There's nowhere to run that they won't find you. The Order has resources, connections. They'll hunt you across continents if necessary. His grip tightened. But there is another option. What? Come with me. Accept the mate bond. Become my queen, and I can protect you both under pack law. The wolves have remained hidden from the hunters. For good reason. We know how to disappear completely. Lyra stared at him, her mind reeling. Queen? Pack? You're talking like you're some kind of royalty. Kale's smile held no humor. I am the alpha king of the northern packs, Lyra. The last of my line, cursed to remain in wolf form during every full moon until I find my true mate. The mate who can break the curse and restore the balance between our worlds. This is insane. She stood up, pacing the small confines of the room. Yesterday I was a servant girl. Tonight you're telling me I'm some long-lost royal with magical healing powers, and you want me to become a werewolf queen? I'm telling you that you have a choice. Kyle's voice was steady, but she could see the desperation in his eyes. Stay here and watch your brother die while the hunters close in, or come with me and discover who you really are, what you're capable of. Finn coughed again, and this time flecks of blood appeared on his lips. The sight of it made something fierce and protective rise up in Lyra's chest, something that felt ancient and powerful. If I come with you, she said slowly, what exactly would that mean? This mate bond you mentioned? It would mean joining our souls, sharing our strengths and weaknesses. You would gain some of my abilities, enhanced senses, increased healing, extended life. And I would finally be free of the curse that's been eating away at my humanity for decades. And my brother? Your healing touch, enhanced by the mate bond, could save him. The pack would accept him as family. He'd be under my protection for life. Lyra looked at Finn's pale face, at the blood on his lips, at the way his chest barely rose and fell with each labored breath. Then she looked at Kale, this mysterious stranger who claimed to be her destiny, who offered her a life she'd never dared imagine. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, and in the distance, she could hear the sound of horses approaching through the storm. The hunters were coming. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked. Kyle tilted his head, listening to sounds she couldn't yet hear. "About 30 seconds. They're almost at the manor gates." 30 seconds to choose between the only life she'd ever known and a future filled with magic, danger, and impossible love. 30 seconds to decide whether to trust a man who might be her salvation or her destruction. Lyra closed her eyes, placed one hand on her dying brother's chest and the other on Kale's wounded shoulder. The moment her skin touched both of them, power flooded through her, warm, golden, and absolutely undeniable. She opened her eyes and met Kale's gaze. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll come with you." His smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "Then hold on tight, my queen, and prepare to discover what it truly means to be alive." Chapter 3. The Binding of Souls. The sound of hoofbeats on cobblestone grew louder, accompanied by the harsh voices of men who had spent their lives hunting creatures like Kale. Lyra could hear them shouting orders, coordinating their search of the manor grounds. "The mate bond," she said urgently, helping Finn sit up despite his weakened state. "How do we—" "Here." Kale pulled a silver chain from around his neck, revealing an ancient pendant carved with symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the candlelight. "This has been passed down through the Alpha bloodline for 1,000 years. It will recognize you as my true mate if the bond is genuine." He pressed the pendant into her palm, and the moment the metal touched her skin, it began to glow with a soft blue light. The warmth spread up her arm and through her entire body, awakening something deep in her core that had been sleeping her entire life. "I can feel it," she gasped. "There's something inside me, something that's been waiting." "Your true nature." Kale's voice was strained with pain and something deeper, hope. "Let it surface, Lyra. Don't fight what you are." The voices outside grew closer. She could hear boots on the manor steps now, the creak of doors being forced open. Lady Pemberton's voice rose above the others, directing the search with cold precision. "Check every room, the servant quarters especially. If the beast is here, it will seek out its own kind." Its own kind. The words hit Lyra like a physical blow. Lady Pemberton had known all along what she suspected Lyra to be. "Now or never," Kale whispered, extending his hand toward her. "Do you trust me?" Lyra looked at her brother, barely clinging to consciousness, then at Kale with his golden eyes full of desperate hope. She thought of 5 years of servitude, of being invisible and powerless while the people she loved suffered. The old Lyra would have hidden, would have hoped the danger would pass them by. But the woman awakening inside her was not the old Lyra. She clasped Kale's hand with her free one while still holding the pendant, and the world exploded into sensation. Power rushed through her like a river breaking through a dam. She could suddenly hear the heartbeats of everyone in the manor, could smell the fierce sweat of the hunters and the sickness poisoning her brother's blood. Most overwhelming of all, she could feel Kale's presence in her mind, not intruding, but intertwining, like two melodies becoming a harmony. "Lyra." His voice echoed in her thoughts, warm and wondering. "You're magnificent." The pendant grew brighter, its light filling the small room, and Lyra felt something fundamental shift inside her. Knowledge flooded her mind, memories that weren't hers, images of a world where humans and supernatural beings had once lived in balance, before fear and hatred had driven them apart. She saw herself as she truly was, not a servant girl, but the last daughter of the Thorn bloodline, born with the power to heal, to bridge worlds, to break ancient curses with her very touch. And she saw Kale as he really was, not just a man, but an alpha king bound by magic to protect his people, cursed to lose more of his humanity with each passing full moon, until he became the very monster the hunters claimed he already was. The curse, she breathed aloud, understanding flooding through her. You transform completely during the full moon because you've been alone too long. Without a mate to anchor your human side. I become nothing but beast. His mental voice was tinged with old pain. Mindless savage. My pack has had to cage me for the last 20 years to protect everyone, including myself. But with you, the bond will keep you human. She could see it now, the way their joined souls would create a tether, keeping him grounded no matter how strong the wolf became. Footsteps pounded up the servants' stairs. They were out of time. Lyra turned to Finn, pressing both hands to his chest. The healing power that had always been dormant in her blood surged forward, amplified 100-fold by the mate bond. She could see the poison in his system like black threads woven through his veins, and she began to unravel them one by one. Lyra, what? Finn's eyes widened as golden light poured from her hands into his body. You're glowing. I'm saving you, she said simply, pouring everything she had into drawing the toxins from his blood. She felt Kale's strength flowing through the bond, supporting her, giving her the power she needed to complete the healing. The door to their room burst open just as Finn's fever broke and his breathing steadied. 3 men in dark leather armor stood in the doorway, silver weapons gleaming in their hands. Behind them loomed Lady Pemberton, her cold eyes fixed on the glowing pendant around Lyra's neck. Well, well, she said with satisfaction. The little servant reveals her true colors at last. Lord Commander, as you can see, my suspicions were correct. We have not 1 but 2 supernatural creatures hiding under our very roof. The lead hunter, a scarred man with eyes like winter ice, stepped forward. Lyra Thorne, by the authority of the Order of the Iron Cross, you are under arrest for the crime of existing as an unregistered supernatural being. You will come with us for testing and eventual purification. Like hell she will. Kale rose from the cot, and despite his wounds, power radiated from him like heat from a forge. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as his eyes began to glow brighter. Kale Blackwood, the Lord Commander said with grim pleasure. The cursed Alpha King himself. Your pack has hidden you well, but not well enough. The Order has been tracking you for months. You made one mistake, Commander. Kale's voice carried a growl that made Lyra's heart race, and the hunters stepped back nervously. You threatened my mate. The transformation began before the words were fully out of his mouth. Bone and muscle shifted beneath his skin as he grew larger, more dangerous. His human form didn't disappear entirely. Instead, it merged with something wilder, creating a being that was neither fully man nor fully wolf, but something far more terrifying than either. Impossible, Lady Pemberton gasped. He shouldn't be able to maintain consciousness during a partial shift. The reports said... The reports were wrong. Lyra stepped forward, still glowing with residual healing power. No longer the cowering servant, but every inch the queen she was born to be. Because he's not alone anymore. She could feel Kale's wild joy through the bond, his amazement at being able to transform without losing himself. For the first time in decades, he was in complete control of both his human and wolf natures. Together, his voice whispered through their mental connection. We're stronger together. The Lord Commander raised his silver blade, but before he could strike, Finn sat up on his cot, fully healed, his eyes bright with renewed strength. You poisoned me, he said to Lady Pemberton with quiet fury. For months, you've been slowly killing me just to force my sister to reveal what she was. A necessary test, Lady Pemberton replied coldly. The Thorn bloodline needed to be confirmed before we could. She never finished the sentence. Kyle moved with inhuman speed, crossing the room and disarming all 3 hunters before they could react. His claws, longer and deadlier than any natural wolf's, rested against the Lord Commander's throat. "Here's what's going to happen," Kyle said, his voice carrying the absolute authority of an alpha king. "You're going to leave. You're going to tell the Order that you found nothing here. And you're never going to hunt my mate or her family again." "We cannot," the commander began. "You can and you will." Lyra stepped up beside Kale, her hand finding his transformed one. The moment they touched, power flared between them. Not just supernatural strength, but the kind of unshakable unity that could reshape the world. "Because if you don't," she continued, her voice carrying newfound steel, "I'll do more than just heal the supernatural beings you've hurt. I'll start awakening every dormant bloodline in the kingdom, every hidden family, every suppressed gift, every creature that's been forced into hiding by your order." Lady Pemberton's face went white. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me." Lyra smiled, and for the first time in her life, it held no trace of the meek servant she'd pretended to be. "I am Lyra Thorn, last daughter of the healer bloodline and true mate to the Alpha King. And this is just the beginning." The hunters retreated, dragging a protesting Lady Pemberton with them. But Lyra knew this was far from over. The Order would regroup, would return with greater numbers and better preparation. "We need to leave," she said to Kale as his form shifted back to human. "Tonight, before they can bring reinforcements." "My pack is waiting in the northern forests," Kyle replied, pulling her close. Through the Achor's bond, she could feel his relief, his joy, his overwhelming love. "Are you ready to become a queen, Lyra Thorn?" She looked at Finn, now standing strong and healthy beside them, then back at Kale with his golden eyes full of promise and danger. "I was born ready," she said. "I just didn't know it yet." Chapter 4. Into the Wild. The northern forest was nothing like the tamed woodlands around Pemberton Manor. Here, ancient trees towered overhead like cathedral spires, their branches so thick they blocked out the moon and stars. The air hummed with wild magic, and Lyra could feel it calling to the newly awakened power in her blood. They had been traveling for 3 hours since fleeing the manor, moving through terrain that would have been impossible to navigate in the darkness, if she were still fully human. But the mate bond had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. Her night vision was sharper, her hearing more acute, and her sense of smell so enhanced she could track their path by scent alone. "How much farther?" Finn asked, though he showed no signs of fatigue despite his recent brush with death. The healing had done more than cure the poison. It had awakened traces of supernatural heritage in him as well, legacy of the Thorn bloodline that had been dormant until now. "We're close," Kale replied, his voice carrying easily through the night air. He had been leading them along paths that existed more in the supernatural realm than the physical world, hidden ways that only those with wolf blood could find. "The pack will have scouts watching for us by now." As if summoned by his words, a low howl echoed through the trees ahead of them. It was answered by another, then another, until the forest rang with the voices of dozens of wolves calling their alpha home. Lyra shivered, but not from cold. The howls resonated in her bones, awakening something primal and fierce. Through the mate bond, she could feel Kale's response, relief, joy, and a deep sense of belonging that brought tears to her eyes. "Home," his mental voice whispered to her. "I'm bringing you home." They emerged into a vast clearing where the moon finally broke through the canopy, bathing everything in silver light. What Lyra saw took her breath away. It wasn't a primitive camp as she'd expected, but a thriving community that blended seamlessly with the natural world. Elegant tree houses connected by rope bridges rose into the canopy, while ground-level dwellings seemed to grow from the earth itself. Gardens of herbs and vegetables flourished in organized plots, and she could see workshops where pack members crafted everything from furniture to weapons. But it was the people, the wolves, that truly amazed her. Men and women of all ages moved through the settlement with fluid grace, many in human form, but some in their wolf shapes, and others in the partial shift that Kale had shown at the manor. Children played together regardless of which form they wore, and elders sat around glowing fire crystals, their eyes reflecting ancient wisdom. "Welcome to Moonhaven," Kale said softly, pride evident in his voice. "The last free pack in the northern kingdoms." A woman approached them, tall and regal, with silver-streaked hair braided with small bones and crystals. Her eyes were the same golden color as Kale's, and power radiated from her like heat from a bonfire. "My son," she said, embracing Kale with fierce joy. "When the scouts reported hunters near the manor, we feared the worst." "Mother, I'd like you to meet Lyra Thorne." Kale's hand found Lyra's, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. "My true mate and your future daughter-in-law." The woman, who could only be the previous Alpha Queen, studied Lyra with eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. After a moment that felt like an eternity, she smiled. "Lyra of the Thorn bloodline, we have been waiting for you for a very long time." She stepped forward and gently touched Lyra's face, her fingers tracing the same path Kale's had earlier. "I am Vera Blackwood, and I welcome you as family." The formal words seemed to trigger something in the clearing. Pack members began gathering around them, forming a loose circle. Lyra could feel their curious gazes, could sense them testing the air for her scent, evaluating this human woman their Alpha King claimed as mate. "The bond is genuine," declared an elderly man with intricate tattoos covering his arms. "I can smell the magic joining their souls." "But she's human," protested a younger woman with suspicious eyes. "How can a human break the Alpha's curse?" "She's not entirely human," Vera said calmly, still studying Lyra with those penetrating eyes. "Look at her aura, child. See how it shimmers with healing light? The Thorn bloodline was old when our packs were young. They were the bridge between worlds, the healers who could mend both body and spirit." "I don't understand any of this," Lyra admitted, overwhelmed by the attention and the weight of expectations she could feel pressing down on her. "Yesterday I was scrubbing floors. Tonight you're telling me I'm some kind of mystical healer destined to break ancient curses. I don't know how to be what you need me to be." A hush fell over the gathered pack. In the silence, Lyra could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could feel the doubt and uncertainty radiating from some of the wolves around her. Then Kale stepped in front of her, his presence a shield against their judgment. "She doesn't need to prove herself to anyone," he said, his voice carrying absolute alpha authority. "The mate bond has chosen. The curse is already beginning to break. Look at me, truly look, and see that I stand before you in perfect control of both sides of my nature." It was true. Even Lyra could see the change in him. Where before there had been a constant tension, a battle between human and wolf that played out in the set of his shoulders and the careful control of his movements, now there was perfect harmony. He was more himself than he had ever been. "The real question," Cal continued, turning to face the pack, "is whether you will accept your new queen with the same loyalty you've shown me. Because make no mistake, where I go, she goes. What threatens her, threatens me. And anyone who cannot accept that is free to leave Moonhaven tonight." Several pack members shifted uncomfortably, but none stepped forward to challenge his words. After a long moment, an old woman with silver hair down to her waist moved out of the circle, I would test the girl, she said, her voice carrying the authority of great age. Not her bloodline or her mate bond, but her heart. Will she sacrifice for the pack as she has sacrificed for her brother? Mother Sage, Vera warned. She has just arrived. Peace, daughter. The elderly woman, clearly a figure of great respect despite not being the alpha, approached Lyra slowly. Child, do you know what it means to be queen to a pack of wolves? Lyra lifted her chin, meeting the old woman's eyes steadily. I'm learning. It means putting the needs of every member above your own comfort. It means being willing to die for people you've never met, simply because they are yours to protect. It means carrying the pain of every pack member who suffers, and the responsibility for every decision that affects their lives. Mother Sage circled her slowly, like a predator evaluating prey. Are you prepared for such a burden? I don't know, Lyra said honestly. But I know I couldn't live with myself if I walked away from it. These people, your people, they've been hunted and persecuted for who they are. They've had to hide in the forest while humans like Lady Pemberton plot their extinction. If I have the power to change that, how can I not try? Mother Sage stopped directly in front of her. And what of your brother? Will you ask him to give up his human life for our world? Lyra glanced at Finn, who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes. The poison had been cleansed from his system, but more than that, she could see supernatural awareness in his gaze now, the awakening of gifts he'd never known he possessed. That's his choice to make, she said finally. But whatever he decides, I won't abandon him, just as I won't abandon this pack if they'll have me. Finn stepped forward, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what was happening. I choose to stay. I choose this family, this life. The human world never wanted us anyway. We were nothing but servants, property to be used and discarded. Here we can be what we were always meant to be. Mother Sage studied them both for another long moment, then smiled. The first genuinely warm expression Lyra had seen from her. Welcome, Queen Lyra, she said formally, then dropped to one knee. I pledge my loyalty to you and your line. One by one, the other pack members followed suit, kneeling in the moonlight while Lyra stood frozen in shock. These proud, powerful beings were acknowledging her as their leader, accepting her not because of bloodline or magic, but because of the choice she'd made to stand with them. Kale's hand squeezed hers, his warmth and strength flowing through the bond to steady her. You've got this, his mental voice assured her. They can see what I saw from the moment I met you. You were born to lead. Rise, Lyra said, her voice stronger than she'd expected. Please, all of you. If I'm to be your queen, then you are my family. And family doesn't kneel to each other. As the pack members rose, talking among themselves with obvious approval, Vera approached again. There will be time for proper introductions tomorrow, she said warmly. Tonight, you both need rest. The mating ceremony can wait until... No. Kale's interruption surprised everyone, including Lyra. It can't wait. The curse is broken but not sealed. Until the bond is completed, it could still reassert itself. Mating ceremony? Lyra felt heat flood her cheeks. What exactly does that involve? Kyle's eyes darkened with unmistakable desire, but his voice remained gentle. It's not what you're thinking. It's a ritual that binds our souls completely, makes the mate bond permanent and unbreakable. We pledge ourselves to each other before the pack and the moon, and... He hesitated, as if struggling with how much to explain. And, she prompted, and we run together in wolf form under the full moon, which happens to be tomorrow night. Lyra stared at him. Kale, I hate to break this to you, but I don't have a wolf form. I'm not a shifter. You are now, Mother Sage said matter-of-factly. The mate bond with an alpha king awakens all latent supernatural abilities. By tomorrow night, your wolf will emerge. My wolf, Lyra repeated faintly. The day just kept getting more surreal. Your wolf, Kale confirmed, his mental voice full of anticipation. And I cannot wait to meet her. As the pack began to disperse, heading to their homes for the night, Lyra looked around at the magical settlement that was now hers to protect. Tomorrow she would undergo a mating ceremony with a werewolf king. Tomorrow night she would transform for the first time and run wild under the full moon. But tonight, for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged. Chapter 5. The Queen's Trial. Dawn broke through the forest canopy like liquid gold, painting the settlement in warm hues that made everything look touched by magic. Lyra woke in a bed softer than any she'd ever known, in a treehouse that swayed gently with the morning breeze. For a moment, she thought it had all been an impossible dream, until she felt the warm presence of Kale's mind brushing against hers through the mate bond. "Good morning, my queen." His mental voice was full of gentle amusement. "Sleep well?" She sat up, realizing she was alone in the spacious room. Sunlight streamed through windows carved directly into the living tree trunk, and she could hear the sounds of the pack beginning their day below. Children laughing, adults calling to each other, the distant ring of metal on metal from what sounded like a blacksmith's forge. "Where are you?" she asked through the bond, still marveling at this new form of communication. Council meeting. Pack business that couldn't wait. She could feel his reluctance to be away from her, along with something else. Tension. Worry. "But there's something you need to know. The Order sent ravens overnight. They're demanding the pack surrender you within 3 days, or they'll march on Moonhaven with a full army." Ice ran through Lyra's veins. She'd known this was coming, but hearing it made real sent panic clawing at her chest. How many soldiers? 500. Along with their best hunters and enough silver weapons to kill every supernatural being in the northern kingdoms. Kale's mental voice was grim. "Don't worry, we faced worse odds. But the council wants to meet you officially before tonight's ceremony. Some of them are concerned about binding their alpha to someone who's never been tested in battle." Before Lyra could respond, a soft knock came at her door. "My lady?" A young woman's voice called. "I'm Mira, your assigned attendant. Mother Vera sent me to help you prepare for the day." Lyra opened the door to find a girl who couldn't be more than 17, with dark hair braided with small blue flowers and eyes that shifted between human brown and wolf gold. She carried a tray of food that smelled like heaven and a bundle of clothes that looked far finer than anything Lyra had ever worn. "Thank you, but I don't need an attendant," Lyra said automatically. "I'm used to taking care of myself." Mira's smile was gentle but knowing. "With respect, my lady, you're not just taking care of yourself anymore. You're taking care of all of us. Let me help you be the queen we need." There was wisdom in those young eyes that made Lyra step aside and allow the girl to enter. As Mira laid out the clothes, a deep green dress that looked like it was woven from forest shadows and moonlight, she spoke quietly. "The pack is nervous," she admitted. "Not about you personally, but about what your arrival means. We've been hidden for so long, safe in our isolation. Now the hunters know where we are, and everything is about to change." "Are you afraid?" Lyra asked, studying the girl's face. "Terrified," Mira said honestly, "but also excited. Do you know what it's like to live your whole life hiding what you are? Never being able to run free except within these boundaries? Never being able to help the human settlements when disasters strike, even though we could save lives?" Lyra thought of her own years of hiding, of suppressing every instinct that told her she was meant for more than servitude. "I think I do. The elders say you have the power to change, everything. To bring back the old ways, when our kinds lived in harmony. Mira's eyes were bright with hope. Is it true? I don't know, Lyra said quietly, but I'm going to try. As Mira helped her dress and arranged her hair with the same small flowers that adorned her own braids, Lyra found herself thinking about responsibility. Yesterday, she'd been responsible only for herself and Finn. Today, the hopes and fears of an entire pack rested on her shoulders. You're spiraling. Kale's voice spoke gently in her mind. I can feel your anxiety through the bond. 500 soldiers, Kale. An army coming to destroy your people because of me. Coming to destroy my people because they fear what we represent together. His mental voice was firm, anchoring her spinning thoughts. This was always going to happen eventually. The Order can't allow a free pack to exist. It gives other supernatural beings too much hope. At least now we can face them with a united front. A commotion outside drew her attention to the window. In the clearing below, she could see pack members gathering around a group of newcomers, wolves in both human and animal form who looked travel-worn and exhausted. Refugees, Mira explained, following her gaze. Word is spreading about the Alpha King finding his mate. Supernatural beings are fleeing their hiding places, hoping to find sanctuary here before the Order's army arrives. Lyra watched as Vera and other pack leaders moved among the newcomers, offering food and comfort. She counted at least 30 new arrivals, including several children who clung to their parents with the wide-eyed fear of those who had seen too much. We can't protect all of them, she realized with growing horror. Not against 500 soldiers. No, Mira agreed quietly. We can't. But we have to try, don't we? Because if we don't stand for them, who will? The words hit Lyra like a physical blow. This was what queenship meant. Not just protecting those who were already safe, but standing as a beacon for those who had nowhere else to turn. I need to see Kale, she told Mira. Where is this council meeting? The Great Hall. But my lady, they weren't expecting you until... Plans change. Lyra was already moving toward the door, her mind made up. If they want to judge whether I'm fit to be their queen, they can do it while I'm actually behaving like one. The Great Hall turned out to be a massive chamber carved into the heart of an ancient oak tree, its walls alive with growing wood, and its ceiling open to the sky above. 12 pack members sat around a circular table made from a single enormous tree stump, with Kyle at the head, and an empty chair, clearly meant for her, at his right hand. The conversation stopped abruptly when she entered. Lyra could feel their surprise, their assessment, their wariness. These were the pack's leaders, alphas and betas, healers and warriors, the wisest and strongest of their kind. And they were all staring at her like she was a puzzle they couldn't solve. Lyra. Kale rose from his chair, relief and concern warring in his expression. The meeting wasn't supposed to start for another hour. I know, but I saw the refugees arriving, and I realized we need to talk about more than just whether I'm worthy to be your mate. She took her place in the empty chair, meeting each council member's gaze steadily. We need to talk about what kind of queen you actually need. An older man with scars covering half his face leaned forward. And what kind do you think that is, girl? The kind who doesn't let children die to preserve her own safety, Lyra replied without hesitation. The kind who understands that true strength comes from protecting those who can't protect themselves. Pretty words, the scarred man, who she was beginning to suspect was the pack's war leader, said dismissively. But the Order's army will be here in 3 days. We need strategies, not speeches. Then let's strategize. Lyra leaned forward, surprising them with her directness. How many can fight? 200 adults capable of combat, Vera answered. Against 500 trained soldiers with silver weapons and anti-supernatural wards. Terrible odds, Lyra agreed. What about evacuation? How quickly could we move the children and non-combatants to safety? A woman with intricate tattoos covering her arms shook her head. There is no safety. The Order has allies in every kingdom. They've been planning this purge for decades. Then we don't run. Lyra's voice was steady, though her heart was racing. We stand and fight, but not here. Kyle's eyes sharpened with interest. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that 500 soldiers are expecting to face a hidden pack defending their forest home. They're not expecting to face a supernatural army on a battlefield of our choosing. She stood, pacing to the window that overlooked the settlement. How many other packs are there? Other supernatural communities in hiding? Dozens, the war leader said slowly. Scattered across the continent. But they'd never risk exposure to help us. They would if they understood that this is their fight too. Lyra turned back to face the council. The Order isn't going to stop with Moonhaven. Once they prove they can destroy a free pack, they'll hunt down every supernatural being in existence. This is the moment when we either unite or die separately. You're talking about revealing ourselves to the world, one of the younger council members protested, abandoning centuries of careful secrecy. I'm talking about refusing to be ashamed of what we are. Power hummed in Lyra's voice, and she could feel her newly awakened abilities responding to her emotion. The Order wants us to cower in the shadows because they know that when supernatural beings stand together, we're stronger than any human army. Kyle was staring at her with an expression of awe and fierce pride. Through the bond, she could feel his excitement building. You're magnificent, his mental voice whispered. This is exactly what the prophecies spoke of, a queen who would unite the scattered tribes. What prophecies? She asked aloud, and the entire council went silent. Mother Sage, who had been quiet throughout the discussion, finally spoke. The old prophecies, the ones that spoke of a healer who would come in the pack's darkest hour, whose bond with the Alpha King would herald a new age. Her ancient eyes fixed on Lyra with startling intensity. We thought they were just stories, legends to give hope during the worst persecutions. Maybe they were more than that. Lyra felt something clicking into place in her mind, pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving. Kale, when you found me, was it really chance? His expression grew thoughtful. I'd been having dreams for weeks before that night. Dreams of a storm, of a woman calling to me. I told myself I was going to the manor to gather intelligence on the Pembertons, but... He shook his head in wonder. I was following the dreams, following the pull in my chest that led me straight to you. Fate, Vera breathed. The mating bond called you together because the time was right, because the supernatural world needs you both. Lyra looked around the table at these powerful beings who were now looking at her with something approaching reverence. The weight of destiny pressed down on her shoulders, but instead of crushing her, it seemed to straighten her spine. Then let's give them what they need, she said simply. Tonight, we complete the mating ceremony. Tomorrow, we send out the call to every pack, every hidden community, every supernatural being who's tired of living in fear. And in 3 days, when the Order arrives expecting to find a helpless village, she smiled, and for the first time it held no trace of the servant girl she'd once been. They'll find an army instead. Chapter 6. The Queen's First Hunt. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky when Lyra found herself standing at the edge of Moonhaven's training grounds, watching pack members spar with weapons that gleamed like captured starlight. Everything here was crafted to fight the Order's silver arsenal, blessed steel that could cut through supernatural hide, enchanted arrows that would track their targets, and armor forged with protective runes that had been passed down through generations. Second thoughts? Finn approached from behind, and Lyra was startled by how different he looked. The supernatural awakening had changed him in subtle but undeniable ways. His movements were more fluid, his senses clearly heightened, and there was a confidence in his bearing that had never been there before. "Third and fourth thoughts," she admitted. "This morning I was planning a wedding ceremony. Now I'm apparently planning a war. Not just any war." Kyle's voice carried across the training ground as he approached them, having just finished a sparring session that left 3 other warriors flat on their backs. Sweat gleamed on his skin, and his eyes held the satisfied glow of a predator who had just proven his dominance. The war that will determine whether supernatural beings remain hidden and hunted, or step into the light as equals. Through the mate bond, Lyra could feel his excitement, his fierce joy at the prospect of finally fighting back instead of just surviving. But underneath that, she sensed something else. Doubt about her readiness for what was coming. "You think I'm in over my head," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "I think you're exactly what the prophecies foretold," he replied carefully. "But prophecies don't mention whether the chosen ones know how to fight with claws and fangs. Then it's a good thing we have time to learn." Lyra moved toward the weapons rack, her hand hovering over a silver-bright sword before settling on something that felt more natural, a curved blade that seemed to sing when she touched it. "What do you call this?" "A moonblade," said a voice from behind her. Lyra turned to see the scarred war leader approaching, his expression grudgingly respectful. "They're forged from meteorite iron and blessed by pack shamans. Lighter than steel, sharper than any human-made weapon, and they resonate with supernatural energy." The moment Lyra lifted the blade, knowledge flooded through her. Not memories, but instincts, as if her body remembered skills her mind had never learned. She moved through a series of practice forms, her movements becoming more fluid with each repetition. "Impossible," the war leader breathed. "She moves like she's been training since childhood." "Bloodline memory," Mother Sage observed, having appeared at the edge of the training ground with her usual silent grace. The Thornline were warriors before they were healers. The knowledge sleeps in her bones, waiting to be awakened. Kyle's pride flowed through the bond like warm honey, but there was concern there too. "Lyra, the mating ceremony begins at sunset. You should be resting, preparing. I should be learning to protect my people." She spun the blade in a complex pattern that surprised even her with its precision. "If I'm going to be queen, I need to know how to fight beside them, not just heal them afterward." "Then let's see what you can do." The war leader, who had introduced himself as Marcus, stepped into the sparring circle, drawing his own weapon. "Just remember, Your Majesty, that training and real battle are very different things." "Be careful," Kale's mental voice carried a warning. "Marcus doesn't pull his punches, even for royalty." "Good," Lyra replied, settling into a fighting stance that felt as natural as breathing. "I don't want him to." What followed was less a sparring match than a dance of deadly grace. Marcus was stronger, more experienced, but Lyra found herself moving with an instinct that went beyond training. She could anticipate his attacks, could feel the flow of combat like music in her veins. When he finally managed to disarm her, more through experience than skill, she had earned his grudging respect. "Not bad for a human," he said, offering her his hand. "You might actually survive your first real fight." "I'm not human anymore," Lyra replied, accepting the help up. "And I intend to do more than survive." As the training session wound down, pack members began gathering for the evening meal. But instead of the usual celebration, there was a tension in the air, the weight of impending change, of battles yet to come. Lyra was heading back to her treehouse to prepare for the mating ceremony when a commotion near the settlement's edge caught her attention. Scouts were returning at a dead run, their faces grim with news. "Alpha!" one of them called as Kale emerged from the Great Hall. "We have a problem. The Order's advanced scouts are already in the forest, less than a day's march from here." "Impossible," Marcus growled. "They said 3 days." They lied. The scout, a young woman who looked barely past her first shift, was breathing hard from her run. "I counted at least 50 soldiers moving fast and light. They'll reach our borders by dawn." Ice ran through Lyra's veins. The ceremony, the preparation, the desperate attempts to gather allies. All of it might be too late. "No," Kale's voice was steel in her mind. "We proceed as planned. The mating bond must be completed tonight, or the curse could return at the worst possible moment." "Alpha," Vera approached with several other council members behind her. "Perhaps we should evacuate the non-combatants now, while we still can." "No." Lyra's voice cut through the gathering panic like a blade. "If we run now, we'll spend the rest of our lives running. The Order is counting on our fear, on our willingness to scatter like frightened rabbits." She looked around at the faces surrounding her. Wolves who had lived their entire lives in hiding, who had never known what it felt like to stand openly in the sun. Children peered out from behind their parents. Refugees clutched possessions they'd already lost once, and warriors gripped weapons with hands that trembled not from fear, but from long-suppressed rage. "I have an idea," she said slowly, pieces of a plan forming in her mind. "But it's dangerous, and it means trusting someone you've never met with all of our lives." "What are you thinking?" Kyle asked, though she could feel through the bond that he already suspected. "I'm thinking that 50 advanced scouts are expecting to find a hidden pack going about their normal evening routine. They're not expecting to find us gone." She turned to Marcus. "How quickly could we move everyone to the sacred grove?" The war leader's eyes widened with understanding. "The grove is neutral ground, protected by old magic that even the Order respects. But it's also where the other pack leaders will gather if they choose to answer our call." "Exactly." Lyra's smile was sharp as the moonblade at her side. "We complete the mating ceremony at the sacred grove, under the protection of the old laws. Any supernatural being who wants to stand with us can witness it, and when the Order's scouts report back that Moonhaven is empty, they'll assume we fled," Kale finished, his own smile beginning to match hers. "They'll pursue us to the grove, where they'll find not just one pack, but every supernatural leader who answered the call." "It's brilliant," Vera breathed, "but also incredibly risky. If the other packs don't come—" "They'll come," Mother Sage said with quiet certainty. "The prophecies are already spreading. Word of the Alpha King's mate has reached every supernatural community from here to the southern seas. They'll come to see if the legends are true." "And if they're not ready to fight?" Marcus asked pragmatically. "Then we die," Lyra said simply. "But we die standing together, which is more than anyone has done in 3 centuries." The decision was made with surprising speed. Within an hour, the entire settlement was in motion, packing essential supplies, gathering weapons, and preparing for a march that would take them deep into the heart of the ancient forest where human feet had never trod. As they moved through the twilight woods, Lyra found herself walking beside Kyle at the head of the procession. Behind them came 200 pack members, 30 refugees, and the hope of every supernatural being who had ever dreamed of freedom. "Having second thoughts?" Kyle asked quietly, echoing her brother's earlier question. "Fifth and sixth thoughts," she admitted. "But no regrets." "Good," he said, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "Because there's something I haven't told you about the sacred grove." "What?" "It's not just neutral ground. It's where the old magic is strongest, where the barriers between worlds are thinnest." His voice carried a note of anticipation and worry. "Your first transformation won't just be into a wolf, Lyra. It will be into whatever your true supernatural nature decides to become. She stopped walking, staring at him in the moonlight, filtering through the canopy. What do you mean, whatever I become? The Thorn bloodline was never just healers. They were shapeshifters of the highest order, able to take multiple forms as needed. Dragons, wolves, great cats, birds of prey. The magic chooses based on the soul's deepest nature. He touched her face gently. We won't know what you truly are until the transformation begins. And if I can't control it, then I'll be there to anchor you, he said simply. That's what mates do. We keep each other grounded when the wild magic tries to sweep us away. Ahead of them, the trees began to thin, and Lyra could see the glow of moon crystals marking the boundaries of the sacred grove. Already she could sense other presences, pack leaders, and supernatural beings who had answered their desperate call. Are you ready? Kale asked as they approached the grove's edge. Lyra looked back at the procession following them. Her people now, her responsibility, her family. She thought of the Order's soldiers marching through the night, confident in their mission to destroy everything she had come to love. She thought of prophecies and bloodlines, of curses and destinies that had led her to this moment. I was born ready, she said, stepping into the sacred grove where her true nature, and the fate of the supernatural world, would finally be revealed. The ancient magic of the place wrapped around her like a living thing, and for the first time since this all began, Lyra felt truly at home. Chapter 7. The Sacred Grove. Awakening. The sacred grove was unlike anything Lyra had ever imagined. Ancient stones formed a perfect circle beneath trees so old they seemed to predate human civilization itself. Moon crystals embedded in the stone pillars cast an ethereal blue-white light that made everything appear touched by starlight. The air thrummed with power so intense it made her newly awakened supernatural senses sing. But it was the gathering that took her breath away. Representatives from dozens of supernatural communities had answered their call. Werewolf packs from the eastern mountains stood alongside vampire covens from the coastal cities. Fey nobility with their otherworldly beauty mingled with earth witches whose power emanated from their very bones. Dragon shifters in human form spoke quietly with phoenix clans, while Selkies and Merfolk had somehow made the journey inland to witness this historic moment. I've never seen anything like this, Finn whispered, his eyes wide as he took in the assembled supernatural nations. There must be over 1,000 of them. Closer to 1,500, Vera replied, her voice filled with awe. Every major bloodline, every ancient family, they've all come. At the center of the grove, an elaborate altar had been constructed from living wood and carved stone. Flowers that bloomed only under moonlight wreathed its base, and the very air around it shimmered with expectant energy. The mating altar, Kale explained, his hand warm and steady on Lyra's back. Where supernatural bonds have been forged for millennia. But as they approached the gathered crowd, Lyra sensed tension beneath the wonder. These beings hadn't come just to witness a ceremony. They'd come to judge whether the prophecies were true, whether she and Kale truly represented the hope of a new age, or just another doomed romance. A figure detached itself from the crowd. A woman of impossible beauty with silver hair that moved like liquid mercury, and eyes that held the depths of eternity. Power radiated from her in waves that made even the strongest werewolves step back respectfully. Lady Seraphina, Kyle inclined his head formally, High Queen of the Winter Fae. You honor us with your presence. Kale Blackwood, the Fae Queen replied, her voice like silver bells chiming in a winter wind. So this is the human who claims to be your destined mate. Her ancient gaze fixed on Lyra with uncomfortable intensity. She is not what we expected. What did you expect? Lyra asked, meeting those otherworldly eyes steadily despite the urge to look away. "Someone more impressive," Serafina said with brutal honesty. "The prophecies spoke of a queen who would unite the supernatural nations. You appear to be a servant girl who has stumbled into powers beyond her understanding." Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. Lyra could feel their doubt, their disappointment, their growing certainty that they had traveled here for nothing. "Don't let her get to you." Kale's mental voice was fierce with protective anger. "She's testing you. They all are." "You're right," Lyra said, surprising everyone, including herself. "I am a servant girl. I spent 20 years scrubbing floors and being invisible. But you know what that taught me? It taught me to see people when they think no one is watching. It taught me to understand suffering, real suffering, in a way that someone born to privilege never could." She stepped closer to the Fey Queen, ignoring the dangerous energy crackling around the ancient being. "You want to know if I'm worthy to unite the supernatural nations? Then let me ask you something. When was the last time you risked everything to save someone you barely knew? When did you last choose to stand with the weak instead of the powerful?" Serafina's expression shifted from dismissive to intrigued. "Explain." "Tonight, there are 30 refugees in this grove who fled their homes because the Order discovered their true nature. Children who will never see their birthplaces again, families torn apart by hatred and fear." Lyra's voice carried to every corner of the grove. "They came here not because I'm impressive, but because I offered them something no one else would. A chance to stop running." She turned to address the entire gathering, her power beginning to resonate in her voice. "You all came here to judge whether I'm worthy of your allegiance, but I think you're asking the wrong question. The real question is, are we worthy of theirs?" She gestured toward the refugees, toward the children peeking out from behind their parents, toward the elderly who had spent their entire lives in hiding. They don't need a perfect queen. They need someone willing to fight for them, to die for them if necessary. Someone who understands that true strength isn't about how much power you wield. It's about how far you'll go to protect those who can't protect themselves. The grove had fallen completely silent. Even the night sounds of the forest seemed muted as hundreds of supernatural beings considered her words. Then, unexpectedly, laughter rang out, rich and warm and thoroughly amused. A vampire lord stepped forward, his dark eyes dancing with mirth. "Well said, little queen," he said with genuine appreciation. "I am Damien Ashworth, Lord of the Eastern Covens, and I believe you may be exactly what the prophecies promised. Not what we expected, but what we needed." "The trial isn't complete," Serafina said coolly, though Lyra caught a hint of approval in her ancient eyes. "Words are easy, young queen. Let us see what your actions reveal." Before Lyra could ask what she meant, the Fey Queen raised her hand and spoke words in a language that predated human civilization. The moon crystals flared brighter, and suddenly the grove was filled with figures that made Lyra's blood run cold. Spirits of the dead, supernatural beings who had fallen to the Order's persecution over the centuries. "Behold the price of failure," Serafina said, her voice echoing with otherworldly power. "These are the souls of those who died believing someone would come to save them. Those who trusted in prophecies and hope while silver blades found their hearts." The ghostly figures surrounded Lyra, their faces filled with accusation and desperate longing. She could feel their pain, their rage, their crushing disappointment at dying without seeing justice done. "If you claim to represent them," Serafina continued, "then face them. Let them judge whether you are worthy to carry their legacy." "Lyra, you don't have to do this." Kale's mental voice was tight with concern. "This isn't part of the mating ceremony. She's testing you beyond what's required." "I know," Lyra replied, stepping toward the nearest spirit, a young woman who looked barely older than herself, with wounds that told of a brutal death. "But if I'm going to be their queen, I need to understand what I'm truly fighting for. She reached out to touch the spirit, and the moment her fingers made contact, visions flooded her mind. She saw the young woman's life, a healer like herself, trying to help both humans and supernatural beings in a small village. She saw the order arrive, saw the woman die trying to protect the children in her care. One by one, Lyra touched each spirit, accepting their memories, their pain, their dying hopes into herself. Warriors who fell defending their packs. Healers murdered for showing compassion. Children killed for the crime of being born different. By the time she reached the last spirit, tears were streaming down her face and power was building inside her like a storm about to break. She could feel her supernatural nature straining against human limitations, could sense something vast and wild trying to emerge. "I see you," she whispered to the final ghost, an elderly man who had died protecting a group of refugee families. "I see all of you, and I swear by everything I am and everything I might become, your deaths will not be in vain." The moment the words left her lips, the spirits began to glow brighter, their expressions shifting from accusation to hope. One by one, they bowed to her, not as subjects to a queen, but as fellow warriors acknowledging a worthy leader. "We choose you," the young healer's spirit said, her voice carrying the weight of all the others. "Not because you are perfect, but because you understand the price of failure. Because you choose to carry our pain and make it into strength." The spirits faded, but their approval lingered in the air like a benediction. The assembled supernatural leaders watched in stunned silence as Lyra stood transformed. Not physically, not yet, but in some fundamental way that changed how she held herself, how power moved around her. "Well," Seraphina said after a long moment, and for the first time her voice held genuine respect. "It seems the prophecies were more accurate than I dared hope." She stepped forward, and, to everyone's shock, knelt before Lyra. "Lady Seraphina of the Winter Court pledges her allegiance to Queen Lyra of the supernatural nations," she said formally. "May your reign bring the justice our people have long awaited." One by one, the other leaders followed suit. Vampire lords and dragon princes, witch covens and shifter packs, all kneeling in the moonlight while Lyra stood at the center of it all, transformed from servant to queen, not by magic or bloodline, but by choice. "Are you ready?" Kale asked through the bond as the leaders rose and began forming a ceremonial circle around the altar. Lyra looked at the faces surrounding her, beings who had chosen to trust her with their hopes, their lives, their dreams of a better world. She thought of the Order's army marching through the night, confident in their mission to destroy everything she now stood for. "I'm ready," she replied, taking his hand as they approached the altar where their souls would be bound forever. The real ceremony was about to begin. Chapter 8. The Mating Bond and First Transformation. The mating ceremony began as the moon reached its zenith, casting the sacred grove in silver light that seemed to pulse with ancient magic. Lyra stood before the altar with Kale, acutely aware of the 1,500 supernatural beings forming concentric circles around them. Their combined power created an energy field so intense it made the air itself shimmer. Mother Sage stepped forward, her aged hands carrying a chalice carved from what looked like crystallized moonlight. "Before all assembled witnesses, we gather to bind two souls as one, to forge a bond that will endure beyond death itself." The elderly shaman's voice carried clearly through the grove, enhanced by magic that ensured every being present could hear and understand, regardless of their native tongue. Kale Blackwood, Alpha King of the Northern Packs, heir to the throne of wolves, do you come freely to this binding? "I do," Kyle replied, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were undertaking. Through their mental connection, Lyra could feel his certainty, his overwhelming love, and underneath it all, his fierce protectiveness. Lyra Thorne, last daughter of the healer bloodline, chosen queen of all supernatural nations. Do you come freely to this binding? I do. The words felt like destiny speaking through her lips. Mother Sage lifted the chalice, and its contents began to glow with inner light. Then drink, and let your souls recognize what your hearts already know. Kyle took the chalice first, his eyes never leaving Lyra's face as he drank. When he passed it to her, the metal was warm from his touch, and she could smell something that was both wild and comforting, like pine forests and starlight. The liquid that touched her lips tasted of honey and lightning, of ancient magic and promises kept. The moment she swallowed, fire raced through her veins, and she felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. Lyra. Kale's mental voice was different now, not just in her mind, but part of her very soul. She could feel his heartbeat as if it were her own, could sense his emotions as clearly as her own thoughts. I feel you, she replied wonderingly. Completely, like you've always been part of me. The first binding is complete, Mother Sage announced. Now comes the second, the sharing of blood, the mingling of essences that will make you truly one. A silver blade appeared in the shaman's hands, its edge gleaming with the same ethereal light as the chalice. She made small cuts on both Kale's palm and Lyra's, then pressed their hands together so their blood mixed and flowed. The moment their blood touched, the world exploded into sensation. Lyra gasped as Kale's memories flooded through her. A century of loneliness, of watching his humanity slip away bit by bit, with each full moon transformation. She saw his desperate search for her, the dreams that had haunted him for decades, the crushing weight of responsibility he carried for his people. But she also felt his joy at finding her, his amazement at the mate bond, his fierce determination to protect her and their people no matter the cost. At the same time, she sensed Kale experiencing her memories, the years of servitude and invisibility, the desperate love for her brother, the awakening of power she'd never known she possessed. Through the bond, he felt her fears, her doubts, and her unwavering determination to be worthy of the trust placed in her. The second binding is complete, Mother Sage said, though her voice seemed to come from very far away. And now, the final binding, the transformation that will reveal your true nature and seal your bond forever. The moon overhead suddenly flared brighter, its light focusing into a beam that illuminated the altar. Lyra felt the change beginning in her bones, a stretching, expanding sensation that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Don't fight it. Kale's voice was steady in her mind even as she felt his own transformation beginning. Let your true self emerge. Around them, gasps rose from the assembled crowd as both Lyra and Kale began to shift. But where Kale's change was familiar, the graceful flow from human to wolf form that she'd witnessed before, Lyra's transformation was something entirely different. Power coursed through her like molten gold, reshaping not just her body but her very essence. She felt herself growing larger, stronger, her senses expanding beyond anything she'd imagined possible. Her skin tingled as scales began to emerge, not the rough hide of a reptile, but something that caught the moonlight like liquid starlight. Dragon, she realized with wonder and terror. I'm becoming a dragon, but not just any dragon. As her transformation completed, she found herself in a form that was both magnificent and impossible. A dragon with scales that shifted between silver and deep blue, with wings that seemed to be woven from moonlight itself. She was smaller than the ancient dragons of legend, more elegant, designed for speed and grace rather than raw, destructive power. A moon dragon, Kyle's mental voice was filled with awe. The rarest of all dragon bloodlines. No wonder the healing power is so strong in you. Moon dragons were the guardians of life itself. Around the grove, the supernatural leaders had fallen to their knees again. But this time, it wasn't just respect. It was reverence. Several of the elder dragons in the crowd were staring at her with expressions of shocked recognition. "Impossible," one of them breathed. "The moon dragon line died out a millennium ago." "Clearly not," Lady Seraphina said. And for the first time since Lyra had met her, the Fae Queen's voice held genuine wonder. The prophecies spoke truly. She is not just a healer. She is the bridge between all supernatural bloodlines. Lyra looked down at herself, marveling at her new form. She could feel the power thrumming beneath her scales, could sense the magical energies of every being in the grove. But more than that, she could feel how her transformation had completed something in Kale as well. His wolf form was magnificent, larger than any natural wolf, with fur that seemed to absorb and reflect moonlight. But where before his transformations had been tinged with wildness and barely controlled savagery, now there was perfect balance. Human intelligence shone in his golden eyes, and she could feel through the bond that he was completely himself, regardless of which form he wore. The curse is broken, she realized. Completely broken. "Thanks to you," he replied, his mental voice warm with love and gratitude. "You've given me back my humanity while making me more than I ever was alone." The mating bond settled into place like the final piece of an ancient puzzle. And suddenly Lyra could sense every supernatural being in the grove as clearly as if they were all connected by invisible threads. She could feel their hopes, their fears, their desperate desire for the freedom she and Kale represented. But she could also sense something else. A darkness approaching from the south, moving fast through the forest with deadly intent. The Order's army. Kale's voice confirmed her fears. They're closer than expected. Less than an hour away. As if responding to her realization, horns began to blow from the edges of the grove, the signal that scouts had spotted approaching enemies. "Your Majesties." Marcus appeared at the edge of the ceremonial circle, his face grim with urgency. "The Order's forces are moving faster than anticipated. They'll reach the grove before dawn." Lyra looked around at the gathered supernatural leaders, at the families with children who had come seeking safety, at the refugees who had already lost everything once. In her dragon form, she could sense their fear, but underneath it, she felt something else. Determination, hope, and a willingness to fight for the future she and Kale represented. "Then we meet them here," she said, her dragon voice carrying clearly across the grove. "In this sacred place, under the protection of the old laws, we make our stand." "Are you ready for your first battle as a queen?" Kale asked, moving to stand beside her, his wolf form radiating deadly grace. Lyra spread her wings, feeling the moonlight catch and reflect off her scales. Around the grove, 1,500 supernatural beings began to prepare for war. Vampires checking their weapons, Fae lords weaving protective spells, dragon shifters taking to the sky as scouts. "I'm ready," she replied, watching as her people, for they were truly her people now, prepared to fight for their freedom. Let the Order come. They wanted to face monsters in the darkness. She smiled, bearing fangs that gleamed like starlight. Instead, they'll face legends in the light. Chapter 9. The Battle for Freedom. The Order's army emerged from the forest like a plague of silver and steel, their torches creating a river of fire that stretched as far as the eye could see. 500 soldiers marched in perfect formation, their armor gleaming with protective runes and their weapons blessed with magic designed to kill supernatural beings. At their head rode Lord Commander Thane himself, the most feared hunter in the Order's history. Even from her position at the center of the sacred grove, Lyra could see the cold calculation in his eyes, the absolute certainty that he was conducting a righteous purge. "Impressive," Lady Seraphina observed, her Fey warriors spreading out beside her with weapons that sang with winter wind. "They've brought their best." "Good," rumbled Damien Ashworth, his vampire coven materializing from shadows that shouldn't have existed in the moonlight. "I was hoping for a challenge." The supernatural forces had arranged themselves in a defensive formation that would have been impossible for any single species to achieve. Dragon shifters circled overhead, providing aerial reconnaissance and attack capabilities. Werewolf packs held the front lines, their enhanced strength and speed perfect for close combat. Vampire covens controlled the flanks, using their supernatural speed and stealth to strike from unexpected angles. Behind them, Fey nobles wove protective barriers while Earth witches called upon the forest itself to aid in their defense. The sacred grove's ancient magic amplified their abilities, turning what should have been a massacre into something approaching a fair fight. Lyra crouched on the altar in her dragon form, Kale beside her in his wolf shape. Through the mate bond, she could feel his tactical mind assessing their forces, calculating odds, preparing for the battle that would determine whether supernatural beings remained hidden prey or emerged as free people. "They're stopping," Marcus reported from his position with the forward scouts. "Just outside the grove's boundary. They know about the old laws." He was right. The Order's army had halted at the edge of the sacred ground, forming their own battle lines but making no move to advance. The ancient treaties that protected places like this were old enough that even the Order couldn't simply ignore them without consequences. Lord Commander Thane rode forward alone, stopping just at the boundary line where sacred ground met the mundane world. His voice carried clearly across the grove when he spoke, enhanced by some form of magical amplification. "I am Lord Commander Thane of the Order of the Iron Cross," he announced, his words echoing off the ancient stones. "By the authority granted to me by the kings of 7 nations, I demand the surrender of the creatures who have unlawfully gathered in this place." "The sacred grove recognizes no earthly authority," Mother Sage called back, her aged voice somehow carrying just as clearly. "This ground has been neutral since before your nations existed, protected by laws older than your order." "Old laws for an old world," Thane replied dismissively. "We bring new order, purification from the supernatural plague that has infected the natural world for too long." Lyra felt rage building in her chest. Not just her own, but the collective fury of every supernatural being who had ever been hunted, persecuted, or forced into hiding. Through the mate bond, she sensed Kale struggling with the same overwhelming emotion. "Careful," he warned her mentally. "He's trying to provoke us into breaking the sanctity of the grove ourselves." "I know, but it was hard to remain calm when faced with such casual dismissal of their right to exist. The old laws protect us here, but they also bind us. If we attack first, we become the aggressors, and lose the moral authority we need to unite the supernatural world." Kale's mental voice was grim. "But if we wait for them to attack..." "However," Thane continued, his cold smile visible even from a distance, "the old laws also provide for trial by combat. I challenge the so-called Alpha King and his pretender queen to single combat. When they fall, their followers will surrender and submit to proper judgment." A hush fell over the grove. Trial by combat was indeed covered under the ancient accords, a way to settle disputes without breaking the sacred neutrality of such places. But it also meant that Lyra and Kale would face the Order's best hunters alone, without the support of their supernatural army. "He's trying to eliminate us as leaders," Lyra realized. "Remove us from the equation and let the Alliance fall apart without central authority." "Probably," Kale agreed. "But he's also given us an opportunity. If we win..." The old laws would require the Order to withdraw and acknowledge our right to exist. Lyra could see the tactical advantage, but also the enormous risk. Are you confident we can take their champions? Before Kale could answer, Thane spoke again. I will personally serve as the Order's champion, and my second will be Sister Valdris, Blade Saint of the Eastern Monasteries. A figure emerged from the Order's ranks, a woman in white armor that seemed to glow with inner light, carrying a sword that hummed with barely contained power. Even at a distance, Lyra could sense the dangerous competence radiating from her. They're not just sending their best fighters, Marcus muttered. They're sending their most magically enhanced warriors. This isn't just combat, it's an execution. We can do this. Kale's mental voice was steady, but Lyra could feel his concern through the bond. Together, we're stronger than either of us alone. Together, Lyra agreed, though her stomach churned with anxiety. She'd been in exactly one real fight in her life, the training session with Marcus earlier that day. Now she was expected to face legendary hunters in combat that would determine the fate of every supernatural being in existence. We accept, she called out, her dragon voice carrying across the grove with regal authority. But we choose the terms. The combat will take place on the boundary line, where sacred ground meets the mundane world. No weapons beyond what we were born with. And it ends with surrender or death. No quarter given or expected. Thane's smile widened. Acceptable. Sister Valdris and I will face you at first light, when the protective magic of your precious grove is weakest. The Order's army began setting up camp just beyond the grove's boundary, their torches and watchfires creating a ring of hostile light around the sacred ground. Inside the grove, supernatural beings settled in to wait for dawn, their conversations muted but determined. Lyra and Kyle transformed back to human form as the immediate crisis passed, though both kept their enhanced supernatural senses active. They were quickly surrounded by the Alliance leaders, all offering advice and expressing concern. You don't have to do this, Lady Seraphina said bluntly. The Fae courts could simply transport everyone to safety in the other world. Running won't solve the fundamental problem, Lyra replied. Even if we escape this time, they'll keep hunting us. This ends here, one way or another. The girl is right, Damien agreed. Better to face them while we have the advantage of numbers and position than to be hunted down piecemeal later. As the night wore on, Lyra found herself walking the perimeter of the grove with Kale, checking on their people and trying to calm her pre-battle nerves. The refugees huddled together near the center, while warriors of various species maintained watch at the boundaries. Are you afraid? She asked Kale as they paused near where Finn was helping tend to some injured newcomers. Terrified, he admitted. Not of dying, I've made peace with that possibility, but of failing them. He gestured toward the gathered supernatural beings. They've put their faith in us, their hope for a better future. If we fall tomorrow, then someone else will take up the fight, Lyra said with more confidence than she felt. The awakening has already begun. Even if the Order wins this battle, they can't stop what we've started. She looked up at the moon, now beginning to set as dawn approached. Besides, we're not going to lose. You sound very certain for someone who learned to fight yesterday. I am certain. She turned to face him, letting him see the absolute conviction in her eyes. Because I finally understand what the spirits were trying to tell me. This isn't about being the perfect warrior or the most powerful queen. It's about being willing to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. Kale cupped her face in his hands, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. I love you, Lyra Thorne, queen of all supernatural nations, last daughter of the healer bloodline, and the bravest woman I've ever known. I love you too, Kale Blackwood. And after we win tomorrow, We're going to build a world where no one has to hide what they are ever again." As the first pale light of dawn began to touch the eastern sky, they made their way back toward the center of the grove, where their destiny waited. Around them, their people prepared for a battle that would reshape the world, one way or another. The trial by combat that would determine the future of all supernatural beings was about to begin. Chapter 10. Trial by Combat. Dawn broke over the sacred grove like a blade cutting through darkness, its pale light diminishing the protective power of the ancient stones. Lyra stood at the boundary between sacred and mundane ground, feeling the shift in magical energy as the sun climbed higher. Beside her, Kale's presence was a steady anchor through the mate bond, his confidence flowing into her despite the magnitude of what they faced. Lord Commander Thane and Sister Valdris waited on the other side of the invisible line, their armor gleaming in the morning light. Up close, Lyra could see the intricate runes carved into their gear, protections against supernatural abilities, enhancements to their already formidable skills, and wards designed to cause pain to any non-human being who touched them. "Last chance to surrender," Thane called out, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp morning air. "Submit to the Order's judgment, and your followers will be granted quick deaths instead of the prolonged purification they deserve." "Counteroffer," Lyra replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Withdraw your army and acknowledge our right to exist, and we won't destroy every hunter in your organization." Thane's laugh was cold as winter steel. Bold words from a servant girl playing at being queen. "She's not playing." Kale's voice carried the unmistakable authority of an alpha. "And you're about to learn exactly what that means." Mother Sage stepped forward, her ancient staff glowing with ceremonial power. "By the laws written in stone and sealed in blood, let this combat begin. Victory to the righteous, and may the defeated find peace in whatever realm awaits them." The moment the formal words ended, both sides exploded into motion. Sister Valdris moved like lightning-made flesh, her blade singing through the air toward Lyra's throat. But the servant girl who would have been helpless against such an attack no longer existed. In her place stood a dragon queen whose reflexes had been honed by ancient instincts and supernatural power. Lyra twisted away from the strike, her hand shooting out to grab the Blade Saint's wrist. The moment her skin touched the blessed armor, pain flared through her arm, but she held on long enough to throw Valdris off balance. At the same time, Kale engaged Thane in a deadly dance of claw and steel. The Lord Commander was faster than any normal human had a right to be, his movements enhanced by decades of training and magical augmentation. His sword carved through the air in patterns designed specifically to kill werewolves, each strike calculated to exploit supernatural weaknesses. But Kale was no ordinary werewolf. He was the Alpha King, and with the mate bond completed, he was stronger than he'd ever been. He flowed between human and partial wolf form, using his enhanced speed and strength to stay just ahead of Thane's deadly blade. "Behind you." Kale's mental warning came just as Valdris recovered from Lyra's throw and launched another attack. This time, Lyra didn't try to dodge. Instead, she let her dragon nature emerge partially, scales rippling across her skin as she caught the blessed blade in her bare hands. The steel burned like acid against her supernatural flesh, but Dragonhide was stronger than the Order had anticipated. Instead of cutting through, the blade stuck in her scales, and she twisted her grip to wrench the weapon from Valdris's hands. "Impossible," the Blade Saint breathed, staring at her empty hands. "Nothing should be able to touch consecrated steel like that." "I'm not nothing," Lyra replied, her voice carrying harmonics that made the ground itself tremble. "I'm everything your Order fears. Proof that supernatural beings aren't monsters to be hunted, but people with the right to exist. She tossed the captured sword aside and lunged forward, her partially transformed claws raking across Valdris's armor. The blessed metal held, but the force of the blow sent the hunter staggering backward. Meanwhile, Cale had drawn first blood against Thane, his claws finding a gap in the Lord Commander's defenses. But the wound only seemed to enrage the hunter, who began fighting with the desperate fury of a man who had never lost a battle and refused to start now. "You think you've won something here?" Thane snarled, his sword weaving complex patterns that forced Cale to give ground. "Even if you kill me, there are others. The Order spans continents. We have resources you can't imagine. Then we'll face them all," Cale replied, his voice calm despite the intensity of their battle. "One by one, until your organization understands that the age of hunting is over." Switch. Lyra's mental voice cut through their connection as she sensed an opening. Without hesitation, both she and Cale moved, she diving toward Thane while he pivoted to face Valdris. The sudden change caught both hunters off guard. Thane had been focused entirely on werewolf combat patterns, not prepared for a dragon's completely different fighting style. Lyra's scaled fist connected with his chest plate hard enough to crack the metal, sending him flying backward. Valdris fared little better against Cale's wolf fury. Without her blessed blade, she was armed only with daggers and her martial arts training, formidable against most opponents, but insufficient against an Alpha King who fought with the strength of two souls united. But the hunters weren't finished. As Thane struggled to his feet, blood flowing from his mouth, he reached into his belt pouch and withdrew something that made every supernatural being in the grove recoil. A shard of pure silver that glowed with malevolent energy. "A fragment of the purification stone," he gasped, holding the artifact high. "Forged from the concentrated suffering of 10,000 supernatural beings. One touch, and your precious bond will be severed forever." The silver shard pulsed with dark power, and Lyra could feel it trying to eat away at the connection between her and Cale. Through the mate bond, she sensed his pain as the artifact's mere presence began to corrode their spiritual link. "He can't use it without touching us directly." Cale's mental voice was strained but determined. "But if he manages to—" "I know." Lyra could feel their bond weakening with each second the artifact remained active. "We end this now." They moved together with perfect synchronization, their souls so intertwined that they fought as a single entity with two bodies. Lyra transformed fully into her dragon form, while Kyle shifted to his largest wolf shape, and together they launched a coordinated attack that the hunters couldn't possibly counter. Lyra's dragon fire, not the destructive flame of legend, but the purifying light of a moon dragon, washed over Valdris, burning away the blessing on her armor and leaving her defenseless. At the same moment, Cale's massive wolf form tackled Thane, his jaws closing around the hand that held the purification stone. The artifact shattered between supernatural fangs and human bone, its dark power dissipating harmlessly into the morning air. Thane screamed as Cale's bite crushed his sword hand, the legendary hunter finally brought low by the very creatures he had spent his life hunting. Sister Valdris, her armor ruined and her weapons gone, raised her hands in surrender. "Enough," she said quietly. "The trial is decided." Around the grove, supernatural beings erupted in celebration while the Order's army stood in stunned silence. Their champions had fallen, their most powerful artifact destroyed, their absolute certainty in their cause shattered by the reality of supernatural strength united. "We did it!" Lyra's mental voice was filled with wonder and exhaustion as she transformed back to human form. "We actually did it." "We did it together," Cale corrected, shifting back to his human shape but keeping one foot on Thane's chest. "Just like everything else from now on." Lord Commander Thane looked up at them with hatred and defeat warring in his eyes. This changes nothing. The Order will..." The Order will honor the ancient laws they invoked, Lady Seraphina interrupted, her fey voice carrying the weight of binding magic. By the rules of trial by combat, witnessed by all assembled, your cause is judged false and your persecution ended. She gestured, and silver chains appeared around both defeated hunters, not to harm them, but to bind them to the outcome of the trial. You will return to your people and tell them what you have seen here. The supernatural nations are united under their rightful queen and king. The age of hiding is over. As the Order's army began its retreat, their leaders bound by magic and ancient law to honor the trial's outcome, Lyra looked around at the faces of the supernatural beings who had risked everything to be here. They were no longer refugees and outcasts. They were free people, citizens of a new world where they could exist openly and proudly. What now? Kale asked through their bond as they watched the last of the hunters disappear into the forest. Lyra smiled, feeling the weight of destiny settling comfortably on her shoulders. Now we build the world we promised them. A world where no one has to hide what they are ever again. The battle was won, but their real work was just beginning. Chapter 11. The New Dawn. 6 months later. The morning sun streamed through the great windows of the newly constructed council hall, illuminating maps that showed a world transformed beyond recognition. Where once there had been only human kingdoms marked by borders and trade routes, now there were supernatural territories openly acknowledged, mixed communities thriving in harmony, and diplomatic relations that spanned species boundaries that had once seemed insurmountable. Lyra stood at the head of the council table, no longer the uncertain servant girl who had fled Pemberton Manor, but a queen who had earned her crown through trial by fire. The ceremonial dress she wore was woven from dragon silk and moonlight, a gift from the combined supernatural nations that recognized her as their chosen leader. The reports from the southern kingdoms are encouraging, Damien Ashworth announced, setting down a scroll sealed with the insignia of 3 different royal houses. King Marcus has officially recognized supernatural citizens' rights to own property and practice their trades openly. The vampire covens are already establishing banking houses in his major cities. And the Eastern Territories? Kyle asked from his place at Lyra's right hand. The past months had only strengthened their bond, and now they ruled as true partners, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. More resistance there, Lady Seraphina admitted, her expression thoughtful. The mountain clans still cling to the old ways of separation, but the younger generation is more open to change. Give it another year or 2. Lyra nodded, making notes on the parchment before her. Building a new world was proving to be as challenging as winning the right to build it, but infinitely more rewarding. Every day brought new treaties to negotiate, new communities to integrate, new problems that had never existed when supernatural beings lived in hiding. "What about the refugee resettlement program?" she asked. "Better than expected," Finn replied from his position as Director of Humanitarian Affairs, a role he'd taken to with surprising enthusiasm. "We've successfully relocated over 2,000 displaced supernatural beings to communities where they can practice their abilities openly. The healing centers you established are reporting remarkable success rates." The healing centers were one of Lyra's proudest achievements. Using her enhanced abilities and the knowledge shared by other supernatural healers, they'd created medical facilities that could treat both human and supernatural ailments. The centers served mixed communities, demonstrating daily that cooperation between species was not only possible, but beneficial to all. "And the Order?" Marcus asked, his scarred face serious despite the generally positive reports. "Diminishing," Cal replied with satisfaction. After their defeat at the Sacred Grove, their credibility was shattered. Most of their regional commanders have disbanded their forces or redirected them toward legitimate military service. There are still some radical cells operating in secret, but they're more nuisance than threat now. It was true. The Order's absolute defeat and trial by combat had broken their claim to divine authority. When their own champions fell to the creatures they'd claimed were inherently evil, many humans began to question whether the persecution had ever been justified. "The real victory," Lyra said, moving to the window that overlooked their new capital city, "is what we've built here." The city of New Haven spread out below them, a marvel of supernatural and human engineering working in harmony. Dragonfire-forged spires rose alongside buildings grown from living wood by Fey architects. Human craftsmen worked beside dwarf smiths and elven artisans, creating wonders that neither species could have achieved alone. In the streets below, she could see children of different species playing together without fear or prejudice. A young werewolf pup chased a laughing human child through a market where vampire merchants sold goods alongside human traders, while Fey nobles discussed poetry with human scholars in the shade of trees that sang with magical voices. "Your Majesty," a new voice interrupted her contemplation. Lyra turned to see Mira, now grown into her role as the Queen's personal aide, approaching with a message scroll. "A delegation from the Western Isles has arrived. They're requesting an audience to discuss establishing formal relations." "The Merfolk Kingdoms?" Lyra asked, accepting the scroll. "I thought they were still debating whether to make contact with land dwellers." "Apparently, the success of our coastal integration programs convinced them," Mira replied with a smile. "They want to establish trade agreements and cultural exchange programs." "Schedule the meeting for this afternoon," Lyra decided, "and make sure we have the underwater communication crystals ready. I want to be able to speak with their deep-sea representatives directly." As Mira hurried off to make arrangements, Kale moved to stand beside Lyra at the window. Through their bond, she could feel his contentment, his deep satisfaction at seeing their dream made real. "Any regrets?" he asked mentally, his hand finding hers. "Only that it took so long," she replied, squeezing his fingers. "All those years of hiding, of living in fear. What could we have achieved if we'd had the courage to stand together from the beginning?" "Perhaps," he said thoughtfully, "but maybe the world wasn't ready then. Maybe it needed heroes like you to show the way." "Heroes like us," she corrected aloud. "I couldn't have done any of this alone." "Your Majesties," Vera approached with Mother Sage beside her, both women carrying expressions of barely contained excitement. "We have news from the Archaeological Division." "What have they found now?" Lyra asked with interest. One of their ongoing projects involved excavating sites that had been sacred to supernatural beings before the persecution began. The discoveries had already revolutionized their understanding of pre-Order history. "Evidence of the original peace accords," Mother Sage said, her ancient eyes bright with triumph. "Treaties signed between human and supernatural leaders over 1,000 years ago, establishing the principles of cooperation and mutual respect that the Order spent centuries destroying." "Are they genuine?" Kyle asked. "Beyond question," Vera confirmed, "sealed with magic that still resonates today. They prove that the separation between our peoples was an aberration, not the natural order the Order claimed it was." Lyra felt a deep sense of vindication wash over her. Their new world wasn't a revolutionary change. It was a return to the way things were always supposed to be. "There's more," Mother Sage continued. "The treaties mention something called the Crown of Unity, an artifact created jointly by human and supernatural leaders to symbolize their alliance. The archaeological team believes they know where to find it." "And if they do?" Lyra asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "Then we have a symbol that represents everything we've built here," Kale said softly. "Proof that unity between our peoples isn't just possible. It's our natural state." A commotion in the streets below drew their attention back to the window. A crowd was gathering in the main square, but it wasn't the angry mob that such gatherings had once meant. Instead, it was a celebration. humans and supernatural beings dancing together to music that blended traditional human melodies with fae harmonies and dragon songs. "What's the occasion?" Lyra asked. "The anniversary," Finn said, joining them at the window. 6 months ago today, you and Kale completed the mating ceremony that changed everything. The people declared it a holiday, Unity Day." Looking down at the celebrating crowd, Lyra felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the dragon fire in her veins. These were her people. All of them, human and supernatural alike. They had built something beautiful together, something that would last long after she and Kyle were gone. "Happy?" Kyle asked through their bond. "Beyond measure," she replied, "though I suspect this is just the beginning." "Your Majesties," a messenger appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath from running. "Urgent news from the Eastern Kingdoms. The Emperor has fallen ill with a wasting disease that their physicians can't cure. He's requesting the aid of the supernatural healing centers." Lyra and Kale exchanged glances. The Eastern Emperor had been one of their most stubborn opponents, refusing to acknowledge supernatural rights despite mounting pressure from his own people. "Prepare the healing team," Lyra decided, "and ready the diplomatic corps. If we can save the Emperor's life, it might finally open the door to formal relations with the Eastern Kingdoms." "Just like that?" Marcus asked. "You'd help the man who's spent the last 6 months trying to undermine everything we've built." "That's exactly why we help him," Lyra replied. "Because proving that supernatural beings are capable of mercy and compassion is more powerful than any victory in battle." As the council dispersed to handle their various responsibilities, Lyra remained at the window with Kale, watching their people celebrate in the streets below. Children who would grow up never knowing what it meant to hide their true nature. Adults who could finally use their gifts to help others without fear of persecution. A world where differences were celebrated rather than feared. "You know," Kale said thoughtfully, "when this all started, I thought breaking my curse was the most important thing. But now I realize the curse was never the real problem. The real problem was a world that forced people to see each other as enemies instead of allies. Breaking the curse was just the first step toward healing something much larger." Lyra nodded, understanding completely. The mate bond had given them the power to transform themselves, but it was their choice to use that power for others that had transformed the world. "Your Majesties," Mira reappeared, her face glowing with excitement. "The merfolk delegation is here early, and they've brought representatives from the deep-sea kingdoms as well. They're saying this is the largest supernatural diplomatic gathering in recorded history." "Then we'd better not keep them waiting," Lyra said, straightening her crown and preparing to greet their guests. "After all, we have a world to finish building." As they walked toward the great hall where the delegation waited, Lyra reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 6 months ago, she had been a servant girl with no future beyond invisible servitude. Today, she was a queen, building a future where no one would have to hide what they were ever again. The prophecies had spoken of a healer who would unite the supernatural nations, but they had missed the larger truth. She wasn't just healing supernatural beings, she was healing the world itself, mending the ancient wounds that had divided people for far too long. And with Kale at her side, their bond stronger than ever, she knew they would continue that healing work for as long as they drew breath. The new world was no longer a dream. It was a reality, built one choice at a time by people brave enough to believe that unity was stronger than division. The servant girl was gone forever, but the queen she had become would ensure that freedom and dignity were never just dreams again.